Go right ahead. Oh, please go take as many as you like. I think some of the others will take it. I started everything.
Robert's brother. I told you about your visit.
Okay, why don't we get started? Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this very special event as part of our UCLA Promise Armenian Institute's programming in commemoration of the Armenian Genocide. My name is Professor Ann Karagosian, and it is my privilege as the director of the Promise Armenian Institute to welcome you to this lecture, which is entitled, as you see, Rediscovering Garabed Kapikian, a portrait of an Armenian intellectual in the late Ottoman Empire. This will be delivered by our own very talented Promise Armenian Institute postdoctoral scholar, Robert Sukiasyan, Dr. Robert Sukiasyan. This talk, plus the exhibit that you see on display here, examine the life and intellectual legacy of Garabed Kapikian, who lived from 1864 until 1925. He was a prominent Armenian pedagogue, botanist, lexicographer, ethnographer, politician, and public intellectual from Sepastia, called present-day Sivas, who was also a very important eyewitness of the Armenian Genocide. We are also honored to have today the grandson of Garabed Kapikian, Mr. Garo Kapikian of Connecticut, who is present with us today for this special lecture, as well as members of his family. We welcome you and your family to us, and welcome to all of you who are present, as well as those watching online. And this special event, as I say, is in honor of recognition of the Armenian Genocide. And for those of us with Sepastiatsi roots, as I do, 1/4 of Sepastiatsi, this will be very special. I'm also pleased to note that our event this evening is co-sponsored by a number of organizations: the UCLA Center for Near Eastern Studies, the Promise Institute for Human Rights at the UCLA Law School, the Richard Hovhannissian Endowed Chair of Modern Armenian History at UCLA, the Narakatsi Chair in Armenian Studies at UCLA, the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research, or NASR, and the Ararat Gidgin Museum. We are grateful to all of our co-sponsors. And on behalf of our UCLA-based co-sponsored, I'd like to acknowledge our presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the indigenous Gabrielino Tongva peoples. It is a privilege for our institution to acknowledge this history of the land on which we are established. Before we move on with the program and brief introduction, let me just mention a few procedural items. First, let me note that this event is being recorded and will be available for future viewing on our Promise Armenian Institute YouTube channel. And second, for those of you who are watching this event in our Zoom audience, please feel free to pose questions using the Q&A link in your Zoom question, in your Zoom window rather, especially of course when the lecture is finished. Those in person, of course, can raise your hand and we will call on you. Please try to be as clear and succinct as possible in the questions. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you our speaker. Dr. Robert Sukiasyan is a historian specializing in genocidal deportations with a particular focus on the Armenian Genocide, memory studies, oral history, survivor testimonies, cartography, and digital humanities. He holds a PhD from the Armenian Genocide Museum Institute in Yerevan, an MA in International Relations and Genocide Studies from Yerevan State University, and a BA in Art History also from Yerevan State University. He was actually a Fulbright visiting scholar at the Promise Armenian Institute at UCLA a few years ago during COVID, coordinated by our own dear Ann Kerr of the Fulbright program. And he also was a fellow at the Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies at Harvard University, also during the COVID period, 2021, 2022. Since 2023, he has taught the Armenian Genocide courses at the American University of Armenia. He is the author of 7 articles published in peer-reviewed journals and edited volumes. He has held research positions at the Institute for Armenian Studies at Yerevan State University and served as Armenian Genocide Collection Indexer at the USC Shoah Foundation, and has served as well as co-editor-in-chief of the Armenian History and Culture series for Brill Publishers. As I indicated earlier, Mr. Kapikian is with us, the grandson of the subject of this talk, and he is visiting with his family from the East Coast. He is an attorney specializing in criminal and immigration law in the New York and Connecticut area. So we will hear briefly from Mr. Kapikian after Robert's lecture. So without further ado, let us welcome Dr. Robert Sukiasyan to this.
Thank you very much, Dr. Garabed, for your kind introduction. And before I begin, I would like to thank the Promise Armenian Institute to CLA for this opportunity and its staff for their work in organizing this event and all of the co-sponsors. I'm especially grateful to my advisor, Dr. Peter Cowley, for his guidance. I also wish to thank Yerik Cerejan, Iran Minasyan, and Hanjagian Party for their continued support. It is a great privilege to have members of Kapikian family here today, including 2 grandchildren, Garo and Manya. So let me now turn to the subject of the lecture. Rediscovering Garabed Kapikian, a portrait of an Armenian intellectual in the late Ottoman Empire. Emerging from the provincial intellectual world of Sivas, Garabed Kapikian is today remembered through his Yeghern full title of the book is Narrative of a Catastrophe of the Armenians of Lesser Armenia and of its great capital Sabratsia, which is a monumental work long read as a survivor memoir of Armenian genocide. Among his scholarly pursuits, this text stands as his central contribution, the culmination of an intellectual trajectory grounded in sustained practices of inquiry, collection, and verification, reoriented under extreme violence, Rather than a retrospective narrative, Yeğernapadum constitutes an early and methodologically self-conscious effort to render mass violence intelligible and in the absence of an established analytical network. I will try to argue that Yeğernapadum anticipates key concerns of genocide studies by treating destruction as a structured and documentable process. Kapikian reconstructs it as organized in time and space and marked by differentiated forms of violence, drawing on direct observation and selected testimony. This is not to suggest that Kapikian possessed a later legal vocabulary of genocide. Rather, he analyzes destruction in systematic and reconstructible terms. This mode of analysis was shaped by the conditions of Kapikian's formation. His intellectual trajectory took shape in Sivas. So Sivas and Sebastia I will use interchangeably. Sebastia Armenian and Sivas Turkish version. In a setting that challenges conventional assumptions about the geography of knowledge production in the late Ottoman Empire. Far from appearing peripheral, Sivas sustained a dense network of institutions, monasteries, schools, and communal organizations. At the center of this work stood the monastery of Surtneshan and its associated educational institutions. Church in the background is Surtneshan Monastery. These were multifunctional spaces where education, manuscript culture, and communal governance intersected. The Armenian quarters surrounding the monastery provided stable frameworks for everyday life within which knowledge still circulated, was preserved, and transmitted. Kapikian's family home, located directly across the monastery gates, stood within a dense network of Armenian intellectual, commercial, and social activity. Neighboring families, including Sukiasyans, Khazarians, Mesayans, who were closely involved in education, cultural life, and communal leadership, and many would later become his colleagues in both teaching and political work. Garabed was born in 1864 to Manya Nakishyan and Nashan Kapikian. So there is a lot of confusion about his birth year. Many of his biographers give dates as 61, 65, 64 occasionally, but luckily I found this source, one of the journals of Sivas Reconstruction Union, where a piece of letter is published, sent to his student, Raquel Patrick, another intellectual, where he clearly says that my mind is on the images of Sebastian's past. I'm planning to write about old beliefs, many materials from our lives, which he does. Even though I'm in advanced age, don't tell anybody I turned 60. I'm still energetic for work. I feel a fresh force. So, and the letter is dated, so it gives us the clear date. So this is a sketch from Kapikian's neighbor, who quickly lists the families, and that's what Kapikian said. And the last house in front of a monastery. All of this area was destroyed. The church was looted, later demolished by dynamite, and now the area, in the cleared area, stands the modern Sivas City Square on the right. Yeah. So in Sivas, there were 3 Kapikian families, and he, drawing on a ledger preserved at Surtneshan, traced his lineage to a forefather named Gasab Kapik. Gasab meaning butcher in Turkish, and Kapik a vernacular form of Gabriel. From this ancestor, the family's hereditary butcher's trade was transmitted across generations, reaching his father Nashan. Within the family environment, Kapikian's intellectual formation began under the decisive influence of his mother, Manya Kapikian. The household functioned as a primary site of learning where literacy, devotional practice, and practical medical knowledge circulated within everyday life. She was fluent in reading the Bible, the Book of Lamentations of Gregory of Narek, and other texts, while also working with medical manuscripts preserved within the family archive to provide care to both Armenians and Turks. In the preface to his work on Armenian flora, Kapikian later recalled his mother in poetic form, linking his early interests in nature, language, and folk medicine to this domestic setting. These forms of knowledge cultivated within the household and local community would later inform his sensitivity to vernacular knowledge, close observation, and the evidentiary value of lived experience. This environment was further shaped by institutional developments following the Armenian National Constitution of 1863. By formalizing the internal governance of Armenian millet, the constitution restructured the educational system and facilitated the expansion of schooling through lay-led communal bodies and educational councils. In Sivas, these developments translated into significant local educational growth. Associations such as the Union of the Self-Devoted of Sivas played an important role in sustaining and expanding schooling. These conditions formed the foundation of Kapikian's formal education. It's a picture of his mother and Kapikian received his early education at the Nersesyan Elementary School before continuing at Tarkmanchatz, where he studied Armenian, Turkish, French, natural sciences, history, and music, graduating in 1982. This environment fostered linguistic proficiency, scientific curiosity, and historical awareness, reflecting a broader late Ottoman Armenian emphasis on intellectual versatility. Under the guidance of teachers such as Mahmud Norhadyan, Kapikian developed an interdisciplinary orientation that would later define his work. Following graduation, he entered the teaching profession, first at Tarkmanchat School, later at Armenian. His pedagogical activity extended across Armenian history, geography, natural history, botany, anatomy, and French. Contemporary accounts consistently describe him as a devoted teacher. Yeah, the teaching stuff. Kapikian's educational and scholarly trajectory unfolded against a backdrop of escalating violence and insecurity in the Sivas province. Throughout the 1880s, Armenian villages in the region were increasingly subjected to land seizures, physical violence, and the erosion of legal protections. These were not isolated incidents, but part of broader patterns of rural dispossession and administrative breakdown. Particularly significant were the activities of armed groups such as Garapapaks, led by figures like Mir Ali, who after displacement from the Kars region following the Russo-Ottoman War occupied Armenian agricultural lands, often with impunity. Repeated petitions to state authorities proved largely ineffective, while recurring seasonal conflicts further intensified tensions. Within this atmosphere, and especially following the killing of a young Armenian, Grigor Bardakjan, Kapikian was drawn into political life. With a circle of associates, he organized a local revolutionary union, marking the beginning of his sustained political engagement. Kapikian later became an early member, effectively the founder of the Sivas branch of Social Democratic Kenchagian Party, contributing to its extension into surrounding villages and serving for many years in leadership roles. Beginning in 1888, he also worked as a correspondent for Armenian political newspapers published in Europe, including Armenia in Marseille, Hayastan and Hanchag in London. Writing under pseudonyms such as Era of Dionysus, Klochnak Sebastia, or Herald of Sivas, and at times anonymously to avoid detection, he documented conditions in the province with notable precision. He was also involved in establishing and maintaining channels for the clandestine circulation of his publications, participating in a system of smuggling newspapers into the province and distributing them across local networks. Now, this Era of Dionysus is an interesting last name because it's the name of this cave in Sicily, and according to the legend, prisoner politicals were put in here, and because of the form of the cave, the voice would be multiplied, and there could not be secret conversations between political prisoners without guards hearing them. So, and now later on, he became kind of this multiplier of victim voices rather than political ones. This growing visibility of such reporting did not go unnoticed by Ottoman authorities. By the early 1890s, the central government expressed dissatisfaction with the frequency and detail of publications concerning Sivas, particularly in Ancak, which stood in tension with official claims of order and control. In response, local officials intensified surveillance and censorship, targeting channels suspected of facilitating the transmission of information abroad, including the correspondence of foreign consulates and missionary networks. This escalation culminated in Kapikian's arrest on September 27, 1892. He was detained during a meeting in an Armenian shop where he and Gevorg Boyajan were assisting in drafting a report in French concerning the forced Islamization of two Armenian girls, intended for presentation to the French consulate. A subsequent search of his family home, together with the arrest of associates, suggests a coordinated effort to dismantle local networks of communities and torture. During his detention, Kapikian did not confess anything, a stance later remembered within the party as a mark of reliability and personal integrity. During his imprisonment, the Hamidian massacres reached Sivas, and his family home was attacked by a mob. While his mother and other family members survived, his elder brother was killed in the violence. By the end of 1895, amid mounting pressure from European powers and sustained petitions by the prelate of Sivas, Pedros Talmizian, Kapikian, along with approximately 300 others, was released. Rather than ending his activities, imprisonment intensified his political and intellectual commitments. According to later recollections by Stepan Sabag-Yulian, prominent Henchagian leader, Kapikian became indispensable to the organizational life of the Henchagian party, serving as archivist, a custodian of records, described as the soul of the party. This is a beaded piece with some Armenian national symbols, free freedom symbols, leading but describing the cause, and the original is displayed here in this room. You can look at it after a process. And writing says Ishadak bandits Isebestir. Yeah. So he preserved the archive of the party despite repeated searches, imprisonment, torture, which was not a minor task. His archival labor extended beyond preservation to active reconstruction, copying documents, repairing damaged sheets, and restoring illegible portions. The habits of preservation, reconstruction, and an evidentiary care that later structured Yeghevnapadum were thus formed not in 1915, they had been cultivated over decades. So, coming to his research, coming to his research, notably, Kapikian never left Sivas for his education, receiving his training entirely within local institutions and remaining largely self-taught. In contrast of Mani Sajan, who Nazan Maksudian will present later this month, another botanist from the same province. Kapikian approached research through careful observation, comparison, attribution, and documentation in a manner closely aligned with modern scientific methods. His studies spanning language, folklore, and natural sciences circulated beyond the local and entered broader scholarly debates through articles, clarifications, and exchanges in press, reaching as far as Moscow to the north and Boston to the west, all the European capitals, Vienna, Paris, London, also some Armenian centers like Venice with militarists. His research was grounded in sustained attention to the local and the ordinary. Recollections by his longtime friend, Archbishop Torgon Kushagian, offer insight into his methods. Kapikian traveled through Armenian villages, at times in disguise, including being disguised as a woman, to document dialectal variation, particularly women's speech, and recorded oral traditions in diverse settings. Among fishermen on the banks of the Alis River, at village gatherings and weddings, and along pilgrimage routes. His work relied on direct engagement with what he understood as living sources of language and culture. When he could not personally visit the location, he obtained information from trusted colleagues, incorporated it into his work, and identified those contributions explicitly. This combination of first-hand inquiry and attributed second-hand evidence would later reappear in Padum, where personal experience is set alongside the testimony of others. The same documentary discipline shaped his work on manuscript culture, medicine, and botany. He collected healing texts, scrolls, and magical writings, including materials such as the Book of the 6,000, which informed his work on Armenian flora. He identified plant species, traced their classifications, and worked to standardize their nomenclature across French and Latin. Kapikian scholarship formed part of a broader network of exchange. He collaborated with Saad Godabasyan in compiling a bibliography of Armenian manuscripts preserved in monasteries of Sivas, an effort later destroyed along with other materials on the eve of deportation. He also worked closely with Karaca Ajaryan, the leading figure in the Armenian linguistics, providing dialect samples from Sivas and observations on lesser-known writing systems, including the ciphered alphabet known as Aghvanits Gir. His reputation extended beyond Armenian scholarly circles. During a visit to Sivas, the Russian Orientalist Vladimir Kardlevsky drew on Kapikian's knowledge of local communities such as Ghazalbash people. These efforts culminated in two major works, essential not only as scholarly achievements, but as expressions of documentary habits that later shaped Yeğernapadum. The first, Dictionary of Sebastian dialect, preserves far more than vocabulary. With approximately 8,200 entries alongside proverbs, nicknames, personal names, it records beliefs, rituals, traditions, games, and professions. The second major work, Armenian Flora, is equally ambitious. It includes 1,951 entries, among them approximately 550 distinct plant names. Together with local synonyms, plant partner terminology, and agricultural vocabulary. Most are identified with corresponding French and Latin classifications. The material was gathered through fieldwork in Sivas as well as in Gurun and parts of Cilicia, and supplemented by interviews with migrants from Agan, Hamshen, Arapgir, Kari, and Harber, or Harput, or Mamuret Ulazis. The visual dimension was developed in collaboration with artist Neshan Avak Pingyans, who painted 90 plants, while his student Levon Reisyan produced an additional 68 drawings. Both the published books and the manuscripts are on display here today, which you can browse. You can also browse the books, but please don't take them because I borrowed them from UCLA library. Well, these are the plants, and I resized and rearranged them for a better viewing, but these are true to the originals. And both of these works won Izmiryan's Prize, an Armenian award for research. What stands out in this body of work is its governing impulse, a sustained effort to document forms of knowledge rarely formalized, and therefore especially vulnerable to disappearance. The village marketplace, the family manuscript, spoken idiom, and the medicinal herb all emerge as objects of preservation. Before genocide became the object of his writing, Kapikian had already spent decades recording fragile words under threat of loss. Some of his contributions in journals. And that's a really cool picture of him in high hat. some Jagian archival materials we spending, and some minutes from secret meetings. These signs of. And an example of how he would keep the archive. Luckily, one Hachagian who was living in America and was visiting Sivas took some of the materials back to America, then migrated to Soviet Armenia, bringing with him the collection, and now this is preserved in National Archives of Armenia. Thorough lists of members of Hachagian party member lists with roles, with monthly contributions, and so on. So this responsible for the collection is Kapikian. Some pictures from his teaching career. Some pictures from his expeditions. That's the best quality available. Standing up there near the monastery. Yeah. Well, some statistics on the Sivas province on the eve of genocide. So, in the aftermath of the Young Turk Revolution, Kapikian entered a period of intellectual and professional flourishing. He expanded his scholarly and pedagogical activities, participated in broader networks of knowledge circulation, and established a family and had a daughter. Beginning in 1913, amid the accelerating radicalization of Ottoman policy toward its Armenian population, his orientation shifted decisively. Anticipating rupture, he began systematically recording events as they unfolded, noting developments daily. Although he later destroyed these notes because of the imminent danger of home searches before deportation, he retained their chronological structure in memory, reconstructing a sequence of escalating anti-Armenian measures. The organized boycott of Armenian goods under Governor Mehmed Muammar Bey, the arson of Armenian factories and markets across major urban centers, empire-wide conscription of Armenian men aged 18 to 45 into the Ottoman army in August of 1914, followed by their disarmament and large-scale massacre within labor battalions. He records the targeted killing of communal leadership too, including the murder of Vicar Saag Odabayshan. The process further intensified through the systematic confiscation of property and weapons, along with the coordinated elimination of Armenian elites in March-April of 1915, culminating in mass arrests, imprisonment, and murder of approximately 15,000 Armenian men in Sivas between June and September of 1915. These developments rendered the Armenian population increasingly vulnerable in advance of the mass deportations, which in Sivas were announced on July 1st, 1915. Only a few were exempt. Skilled artisans deemed essential to the war effort or to the functioning of state institutions were in some cases temporarily spared, often under condition of conversion to Islam. Kapikian's own family provides a particularly revealing example. His brother, Haji Hovanes, a skilled painter employed in the decoration of government buildings at the time, was offered the possibility of remaining in Sebastia with his family, and was reassured that the requirement of conversion would not be enforced in this case. Kapikian himself was thus presented with the potential avenue of survival. Yet he chose not to remain, conscious of his political past and convinced that his presence would ultimately endanger his entire family. He refused exemption and accepted deportation. The moment of separation between the brothers, as Kapikian recounts it, is especially significant. In final exchange, Hovanes urges him to go, expressing the conviction that he will survive and bear witness. Citation. "You shall see everything with your own eyes, and you shall tell about it." Kapikian states explicitly that he owes both his survival and the eventual realization of Yeverna Padum to his brother's words, which endured as a sustaining imperative across the genocidal journey. This episode prefigures the very function that Yeverna Padum would later fulfill. Survival is not retrospectively framed as accidental, but as bound to be witnessing, and witnessing to narration. The habits of documentation developed in Kapikian's earlier work become most visible in his account of deportation itself. In Kapikian's account, deportation appears first as structure, unfolding across mapped routes, timed departures, and neighborhood by neighborhood removals. Caravans, this is what Armenian deportee groups are called, and this is what they call themselves, caravans. I know it's different in American context. So caravans of deportees move along identifiable trajectories, converge at specific stations, and pass through repeated procedures of registration, expropriation, separation, and ultimately killing. He reconstructs multiple deportation routes in the province. In the province of Sivas, one begins in the Black Sea region, Samsun, Bafra, Merzathon, and Amasya, moving southward through intermediate stations before reaching the first major concentration point. A second originates in Sivas and the upper Kızılırmak basin, passing through sites such as Alacahan, Hasan Çelebi, Hasan Patrik before arriving at Paranjalar. A third extends from Shopping Arahisar and surrounding districts, likewise converging along the southern axis. Beyond Faranjalar, the territory is designated as resettlement zone, marking a transition in administrative control and in structure of deportation itself. At various stages, the routes absorb convoys from other regions, including Trabzon, Harput, revealing a coordinated and expansive system of population movement. Taken together, these trajectories reveal deportation not as a series of isolated expulsions, but as a coordinated system structured across regions and stages. This spatial mapping is matched by an equally precise temporal and demographic record. Kapikian notes that the Armenian population of Sivas was emptied within 15 days. Documenting the deportation of individual neighborhoods with exact dates and household counts. On July 4 of 1915, for example, the Armenian quarter behind the blacksmith's workshops was deported, comprising approximately of 250 households. On July 5, the neighborhoods of Sare Sheikh, Balder Bazar, and Kara Toprak follow, totaling around 400 households. He observes administrative distinctions within the deportation process itself, noting, for instance, that Protestant Armenians were permitted to be deported together in one group, irrespective of their neighborhood divisions. This precision extends to individual episodes. When passing through Alacahan, one of the key stations along the Sivas route, Kapikian distinguishes not merely the day or evening of arrival, but specifies that it occurred toward the evening of July the 10th. So, with the help of my dear friend Manu Gavinian sitting here with us, we identified a good chunk of deportation stations to the point. And during summer, a couple from New York reached to me asking if I have the coordinates. So thanks to Manu's work, who is an expert in localizing of localities in Ottoman Empire and finding and identifying them, we could send them some coordinates, and they went and photographed some of the stations. Ted Andreasyan and Nune Karamian. So they allowed me to use some of these photos for the lecture. This is the Alacahan Kapikian was talking about a moment earlier. At multiple points along the route, Kapikian records and pays special attention to the systematic compilation of lists and deportees. These lists, drawn up at stations such as Kyoto-Han or the Severan Bridge, and later in areas such as Suruj, where government officials conducted a census of the remaining deportees, recording names, origins, and family members, functioned as administrative instruments through which the convoys were repeatedly reorganized by the state. Individuals and families were identified, separated, and at times held back. Kapikian records that the deportees were sometimes classified along confessional lines too. Apostolic, Catholic, Protestant, but also according to social position and perceived wealth, shaping subsequent decisions regarding their fate. The lists thus operated not merely as records, but as mechanisms of selection and state control. Returning to Kapikian's own method of documentation, we see that he incorporates testimonies encountered in situ, selecting, evaluating, and integrating them to reconstruct the fate of other communities. When his caravan passes through the Armenian village of Maghara, comprising of approximately 150 households, he supplements his own observations with the accounts of a woman who reports that the entire male population had been separated and killed, while the remaining inhabitants perished along the deportation routes. What he records on the site confirms the scale of this production. The village lies in ruins, bodies remain in front of houses, and gendarmes stand guard over what is left. A similar method appears at points of convergence. At Kangal, Kapikian draws on information exchanged between caravans to reconstruct the routes and procedures applied to deportees from Amasya, Merzifon, and Kurgan. In doing so, he extends his account beyond a single trajectory, assembling a broader picture of deportation through selective integration of multiple situationally acquired testimonies. That's the village of Maghara. You can see some remaining walls of houses. To illustrate the systematic operation of deportation stations, Kapikian's description of Kyoto-Han is particularly revealing. He presents an organized mechanism targeting key segments of Armenian male population who survived up to that point: businessmen, tradesmen, officials, clergy, and other community leaders, along with their families. He identifies the responsible actors in detail, naming local officials, members of Committee of Union and Progress, and paramilitary leaders. The procedure at Kyoto-Han unfolds in a consistent stage sequence. Prior to arrival, gendarmes warn deportees of the next station and extract payment for protection. At the halt, convoys are immobilized, lists are compiled, and so-called commission presents itself to collect valuables under the pretext of safeguarding them. Men are separated first, then the rest of the convoy is subjected to demands, searches, and threats, with the process reinforced through selective violence and coercion. Men, especially those of military age and communal standing, are identified from pre-arranged registers and executed on site or shortly thereafter. Kapikian notes that roughly 60 to 70 men were killed from each caravan. Looting proceeds in parallel, with valuables systematically collected and sorted for transfer back to Sivas. Although Kapikian notes that his own caravan was treated comparatively lightly at this station, he explicitly rejects this as representative. Instead, he reconstructs the full operation at Kyoto-Han through systematic incorporation of other testimonies, including those of Armenak Gyuragyan from Kyosedere neighborhood caravan, as well as accounts from Saint Sarkis, Mother Church, and Hovdar neighborhood. Some pictures of Kyoto-Han. This is the setting. Existence of these two buildings, everything is preserved in Kapikian's writing. And I want to thank Ted and Nuna again for letting me, for first photographing these sites and letting me use them. Another important dimension of Kapikian's account is his familiarity with many perpetrators, stemming from his public engagement in Sivas. He often knew them personally and in some cases was familiar with their family backgrounds too, allowing him to move beyond anonymity. He names officials, gendarmes, and local participants, specifying their roles and actions, thereby recording responsibility within a network of identifiable actors. He also distinguishes between functions, those who had ordered, organized, carried out, or profited from the violence, showing a structured division of roles within the process. A revealing example is Kütünoğlu Hüseyin, operating at Kyotohan, a member of CUP involved in massacres in Kızılırmak Valley and in the killing of Viktor Sağ Godabaşan earlier that year. In describing him, Kapikian extends the portrait to his father, Kütük Mehmet, a porter known for his close relations with Armenians, who, during the Hamidian massacre, sheltered and protected members of the Armenian community. This contrast is central. Hussein, once socially embedded and even fluent in Armenian, is shown as a figure later incorporated into networks mobilized by Governor Muammer. Kapikian further notes the mechanisms of recruitment into these paramilitary structures, including coercion and other manipulations. Kapikian also identifies hierarchy within deportation stations. He assigns particular significance to sites such as Fırıncılar and Samsat, presenting them as central nodes of collection and redistribution within the deportation network. At Fırıncılar, for instance, he incorporates the testimony of an Armenian woman who worked as a cook for the station commander, allowing him to document the events otherwise beyond direct observation, and providing rare insight into their operation within the larger deportation system. She reports that after the final caravan departed, those left behind, the sick, elderly, children, and incapacitated, were gathered, taken to a nearby ravine, and killed. From rooftop, she witnessed the attack, describing how perpetrators descended with ferocity, before returning with looted goods which they divided among themselves. She further recalls their condition upon return, their eyes reddened, moving in a state of frenzy, before immediately demanding cigarettes, yogurt, and coffee. This detail offers a glimpse of perpetrators, not as abstractions, but as actors moving between organized killings and moments of physical and psychological recalibration. But at the same time, this shows limits of testimony. The killing of those left behind, carried out away from the main convoy, would likely have remained unrecorded without this witness. Certain forms of violence become visible only at their margins. Kapikian also demonstrates a clear awareness of the administrative organization of deportation. He notes, for instance, how gendarmes were rotated as convoys crossed administrative boundaries, indicating a segmented but coordinated system of control. At the same time, perpetrators from Sivas, already familiar with the Armenian population and aware of individual wealth, targeted deportees strategically, extracting valuables before allowing caravans to pass into neighboring jurisdictions. He further records an implicit regulation governing looting itself. Gendarmes and deportation station operatives were not to strip deportees completely, ensuring that those further along the route would still have something to seize as motivation. Yeah. So, Kapikian also talks about weaponization of the landscape. And in his account, the Euphrates crossing presents the river not merely as a geographical boundary, but as a structured threshold within the deportation process, where movement, expropriation, and violence converge in a single coordinated operation. Reconstructed through a layered evidentiary method combining direct observation with multiple corroborating testimonies, the crossing appears not as an isolated episode, but as a repeatable, systematized procedure embedded in the broader logic of destruction. Positioned within the convoy, Kapikian observes successive groups forced onto boats and subjected mid-crossing to systematic looting, beatings, and invasive bodily searches. This account is reinforced through other survivor testimonies, among them Haikanush Zaratsyan, Andranik Gavukyan, Ovsanna Varegyan, and Koharik Kapikian. Across these testimonies, a consistent procedural structure emerges. Deportees are loaded in successive rounds, separated from their belongings and pack animals, and once removed from the shore, subjected to coordinated expropriation, carried out by Kurdish boatmen under the supervision of gendarmes and overseeing Agha, who centrally collects confiscated valuables. The repetition of the crossing underscores its routinized character, transforming the river into an instrument of systematic extraction. At the same time, Kapikian's reconstruction reveals the river as a space where natural geography is operationalized within the genocidal process. The crossing is staged at the point of maximum vulnerability. Deportees confined within boats, separated from resources and exposed to armed control, allowing for the efficient integration of expropriation, bodily violation, and killing. The river's physical properties are thus actively exploited, enabling both the disposal of bodies and the dispersal of evidence. In this way, nature becomes not a passive backdrop, but an active component within the infrastructure of destruction. The same holds true for the mountainous zones preceding and surrounding the Euphrates. In Kapikian's account, these are not incidental landscapes, but functional killing terrains. Regions of ridges, ravines, and deep gorges become sites of ambush, separation, and mass killing. The example of Kanlı Dere, the Bloody Valley, is paradigmatic. Deportees are funneled into narrow passages and systematically exterminated, their bodies accumulating in ravines. These spaces enable both concealment and efficiency. Violence can be carried out beyond visibility, while the terrain itself facilitates the physical mechanics of killing. If the mountains function as sites of annihilation, the river operates as a critical point of dispossession. Beyond the river, Mesopotamia appears as a zone of terminal disintegration, where destruction shifts from overt massacre to systematic attrition, through starvation, disease, and exhaustion. Kapikian reflects explicitly on so that concludes the part of nature weaponization. And coming to the authorship, he explicitly discusses authorship, which is a rare instance, but luckily he does. And when he does, he insists that the primary source of his account is himself, as an eyewitness who followed events to their end, while also incorporating selected testimonies. These are not included indiscriminately, but carefully chosen, evaluated, and integrated, suggesting an early awareness of evidentiary hierarchy and corroboration. He further emphasizes that any historical account requires precision in both time and space. Throughout the deportations, he approached events in his own words with the consciousness of a committed historian. Even under constant proximity of death, he notes that his mind functioned with a certain detachment to what was happening around, registering events in sequence with attention to dates, locations, and detail. What emerges here is a disciplined reconstruction under extreme conditions. He then turns to the question of language. Despite his earlier work in botany and linguistics, he deliberately rejects elevated or formal literary registers. Instead, He adopts the language of the people, those who experience the genocide directly. The language, as he describes it, may appear rough, vivid, even unrefined, but it is precisely for that reason adequate to its subject. The suffering of the Armenian people, and especially of Armenian women, must be rendered in a language that belongs to them, he insists. Only then does he articulate the broader horizon of his work. He notes that when a comprehensive history of the Armenian deportations is eventually written, his account will stand among its principal sources. This is not unreserved language, but an expression of historical self-consciousness. He understands his writing as a foundational contribution to the future historiography. Okay. Well, unfortunately, time doesn't allow me to go through his entire journey. So I will just jump to Raqqa and the atmosphere and evolution of the book. So he settles in Raqqa, designated area as an area designated as a resettlement zone in 1917. After devastating losses, his wife and daughter having died along the way. Surviving through disguise, at times in female dress, the help of strangers, acts of bribery, and ingenuity. It's a miraculous survival, truly, if you follow his narrative. During this time, he began composing a brief account of the deportations, the first version of Yeğernapadum, and entrusted it to a relative, together with another report to be delivered to the German consul in Aleppo. Though it was ultimately destroyed under pressure. I just translated that specific section. After the armistice, Kapikian arrived in Aleppo, a central hub of post-genocide Armenian life. Under British administration, Kapikian and other refugees from Sivas were housed in former Turkish military barracks or Ottoman military barracks. The city, long a major commercial and cultural center of the Near East, now hosted tens of thousands of Armenian survivors from across the empire. In this setting, Kapikian resumed contact with surviving members of his family in Sivas, only to learn of the deaths of his mother, Manya Kapikian, and his brother, Hagi Avanos. Here, he became acquainted with the writer and genocide survivor Aram Antonian. The two collaborated closely in gathering and organizing survivor testimonies. At the same time, he prepared a manuscript at the request of Antonian, the second attempt at Yeğernapadum, titled Report on the Deportation and Annihilation of Sivas and its Surroundings, which he entrusted to Antonian for publication. Although Antonian expressed strong support and promised to arrange publication, the manuscript was never published nor returned despite repeated requests. This is the same complaint. Antonian always gets this complaint. He collects, never returns, but that's how we ended up with the Antonian collection safely resting in Paris and accessible to researchers. But he didn't return it to Kapikian, forcing him to go make another attempt. I'm coming to it. Yeah. It nonetheless survives today in Antonian collection at the Nubayon Library in Paris. Alongside this major work, Kapikian produced shorter texts, such as brief notes on Sivas, past and present, in which he documented the city's monasteries, institutions, and topography, as well as its religious, educational, and charitable life before genocide. At the same time, Kapikian became deeply involved in the organizational and administrative life of the Armenian refugee community in Aleppo. Survivors formed compatriotic unions based on their regions of origin, and Kapikian played a central role in establishing the Sebastazi Compatriotic Union. These regional unions were later brought together under the Interprovincial Union, within which Kapikian served as secretary. In this role, he assumed responsibility for compiling data, preparing reports, and maintaining correspondence with Armenian and international bodies. One of the most significant outcomes of this work was the preparation of indictment report of province of Sivas, again at Nubayern Library. This document, prepared by representatives of multiple communities, constitutes one of the earliest systematic efforts to document the genocide. It includes detailed historical and statistical data on deportations, massacres, material losses, and perpetrator lists across the Sivas region and its districts, as well as summaries of key pre-genocidal events and administrative actions. During this period, on December 24 of 1919, Kapikian began a new chapter in his personal life, marrying Azniv Norarevian, late seated lady, a fellow survivor from Sivas. Like him, she had endured profound loss during the deportation, having lost her husband and 4 children. Kapikian soon accepted an invitation to teach at Jarran Gavorat Seminary in Jerusalem and set out for Jerusalem with his wife and a group of 9 orphaned boys selected for examinations organized by the Armenian Prelacy of Aleppo at the request of the Armenian Patriarchate of Jerusalem. From 1920 onward, Kapikian taught at the Jarran Gavorat Seminary until the end of his life, instructing students in Armenian language, history, and geography. So this is the group picture taken in Beirut. So, to note the potential of these institutions and the level of selection by the prelacy, I'll just show the future fates of 2 of the kids from this picture. One of them being Archbishop Nersoyan, who was the primate of the Eastern Diocese of the Armenian Church, East Coast, on the East Coast. He established 11 new churches, founded Armenian Church Youth Organization, and found the St. Nerses Seminary. Also, he's one of the responsibles of building St. Bartan Cathedral in downtown Manhattan, like 500 meters from Empire State Building on half a block. Another of the kids from this picture is Archbishop Norait Boharian, author of the Grand Catalogue of St. James Armenian Monastery, consisting of 11 volumes. And other accomplishments. In Jerusalem, he prepared yet another, 3rd version of Yeghern Padum and sent it in serialized form to US, to the Social Democratic Kinchagian Party's newspaper Yeridasart Hayastan in Chicago. This is a snippet. It was published throughout 4 years with small chapters like this. Ultimately, he completed a 4th and final expanded version, exceeding 600 printed pages, which was published in Boston with the support of the Sivas Reconstruction Union. Now, that's the original, also shown here, along with its manuscript. An abridged version, only a short abbreviation, is available in English. Antillas reprinted the volume in 2006. It's a facsimile, no further research done. And understanding the importance of volume, Matanadaran translated the volume in 2015 for the centennial of Armenian Genocide in Russian translation, the last picture. But no full English translation yet. On July 26, 1921, his son Garabed was born, coinciding with a visit to Jerusalem by his close friend Torgom Kushagian, then prelate of the Armenian Church in Egypt, who baptized the child. Garabed would later study at the seminary, take the clerical name Giurech, and become an archbishop, playing an important role in the religious and communal life of the Armenian diaspora. Importantly, he's one of the responsibles of Armenian part of restoration of the Holy Sepulchre. And also he was the guardian of Armenian properties and monasteries, and he didn't lose anything during the Palestinian war. And on January 24, 1924, Kapikian's second son, Machitar or Mark, was born, who later served in the intelligence division of the British Royal Force in Jerusalem before emigrating to the United States, where he remained active in Armenian communal life, organizing relief efforts alongside his brother to support refugees in the Holy Land. Alongside his scholarly and pedagogical commitments, Kapikian continued to assist in the work of Sivas Reconstruction Union. His political engagement also continued. In the fall of 1924, he participated remotely as a delegate in the 8th General Assembly of Social Democratic Njagian Party in Greece. In the final years of his life, Kapikian's health deteriorated under the strain of sustained intellectual and organizational labor. On January 19, 1925, only months after the publication of his major work, he died of pneumonia at the Armenian monastery of St. James in Jerusalem. He was buried in the Armenian cemetery of Mount Zion. In conclusion, read in its full trajectory, Yegerna Padum is not simply a survivor memoir composed after the event. It is the culmination of a documentary discipline formed long before 1915 and transformed under the pressure of the catastrophe. Kapikian's work moves between eyewitness testimony, selected and attributed reports, comparative reconstruction, perpetrator identification, gendered violence, violence against children, the weaponization of nature, and reflection on methods. What emerges is not simply documentation. It anticipates the core methodological concerns of Armenian genocide studies and stands as one of the earliest attempts to produce knowledge from within genocide itself. So these are some later Njagian publications. Look where he stands. Very figure perceived as a very central one. And a picture of his widowed wife with orphaned children near his grave. You can see also the original picture here. And a picture of him eating watermelon near the gates of Jerusalem.
Thank you so much for your very thorough presentation, Robert. Before we open the floor to questions, Gato or Manya, would you like to say something? Okay, we have 2 grandchildren. So please come up here to the podium. Watch out for all this stuff.
I want to thank everybody for coming and for organizing this, and of course letting me know about this and inviting me. It's a thrill and an honor, it really is. I met some of you tonight before the lecture even began, and I hope to meet all of you at some point. One thing, Garabed Kapikian has a great-grandson, Rafi, my son Rafi. So the Kapikian name lives, no matter how hard the Turks try. Just my quick thoughts, growing up as the grandson of Garabed Kapikian, I was always intrigued by my grandfather growing up in Manhattan and Washington Heights, and that whole area was inhabited by a lot of Sepastazis. There was two pictures that hung on the wall. One was Jesus Christos, and one was my grandfather. And I always used to stare at those pictures growing up. I always used to think, boy, I would have loved to have met the two of them. And so in that spirit, growing up, and I was named after my grandfather, I set out to talk to as many people as I could that knew my grandfather. Dr. Robert mentioned, he showed a picture of Archbishop Tiran Ersoyan and Norad Boharian, and I knew them. And I used to ask questions. I didn't get too many detailed explanations, like what kind of a man was he and so on. But you could tell he was highly respected and loved. In fact, when I was a little boy in Washington Heights, oh, Bobby could Meds Martet. That's what they used to say to me. And you know, when you're 6 or 7 years old, you think of someone very tall. He's Meds Martet. But I knew what they were talking about. But two vivid eyewitness accounts, two vivid explanations about my grandfather really stuck with me. One was from his niece, Baizar Kapikian. She told me that he was a very sweet man. Karnui bes martyr, anush martyr. Yemur bezdigen gertank iren kirga destenk. Merhede gachagar mesika sirer. And we loved him more than our father, because our father was very strict. And so he used to give us some raisins. The other story, the last one I'm going to leave you with, was by Zare Kapikian. Zare Kapikian, no relation to me, to my grandfather, but he was a student of my grandfather in Armenian school. And one day, my grandfather noticed that Zare Kapikian, as a student, was very nervous about something. Something was bothering young Zare. So my grandfather had these instincts. He said, Zare Hosegur, and go to the blackboard, he said, and write down everything. Tasa, everything, each word, homework, I guess. Blackboard the letsur. So he wrote and wrote and wrote, and he filled everything out. And then a short while later, in through the door walks in some Turkish officials. And they said, we're looking for a lad. We suspect he's one of your students. He goes to your school. He's tall, and he was tall. And he has blue eyes. And he had blue eyes. Baron Kapigan had blue eyes. And my grandfather said, well, what happened? Why are you looking for him? And he said he beat up another Turkish student, and he bloodied him. So, and we suspect it's him. He points to Zare Kapikian. So my grandfather said, well, it couldn't have been him. He's been here all morning. He filled out the blackboard here. Can't be him. So he convinced them that it's not him. And they left. And so after he left, my grandfather called him over. He says, put out your hand like this. And he was expecting my grandfather to hit him on the hand with a ruler. So he closed his eyes like this. He says, and all of a sudden he says, he put some raisins in my hand. So I asked Baron Kapikian. I knew him really well. And he was an amazing man, by the way. But I said to him, Baron Kapikian, by then I was in my early 20s. And I said, what kind of a man was my grandfather? I wanted to know the man. He said, very simply, he says to me in Armenian, that really stuck with me. See, he was a hero. Oh, I said, what kind of a man? He says, your grandfather taught us how to live like heroes, to be heroes. Very simply, he revered my grandfather. And so these things remained with me, and it affected me, and it made me always strive to be the better version of myself. and to hold the family name up high. And I'm very proud to be a Kapikian. And I entreat you, I encourage you likewise to live your life like a hero. Be heroes in this world with everything that's going on. And we're still suffering as a nation, as Armenians. Be heroes. Mm. That's my message. And I think that's what my grandfather would have imparted if he were here. And again, I thank you, Robert. You're amazing. Mm-hmm. I really appreciate you and everybody here. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So now we can open up the floor to questions from our audience for Robert. Yes, please come up here. I think I don't want to block the camera, so I'll stand over here. Yes, we have a question here.
Well, my name is Reverend Kapikian. I was born and raised in Jerusalem. So therefore, I want to say God with your permission from this.
Yeah. I didn't see you walking.
Yeah.
I walked late, so I apologize. Parking was a problem. Traffic.
Wonderful.
Sorry.
I want to say thank you. You're a heaven. And I grew up in Jerusalem, and Yurek Sirpazan was one of my mentors. And my grandmother always said, well, your grandfather, he was coming. That's what the expression was going on. And I just want to say nowadays, when we look at this Garabed Kapikian, he's not just a person. The picture that we showed, I was Norai. So when you showed about Nersoyan Serbazan, I was there. I was humbly a student of Yurek Serbazan. He was my mentor, you know. And every summer we were looking forward toward Garabed Garo to come from New York or from United States to visit us. That was the highlight of our summer. And believe it or not, we were looking forward for that. And you brought us hope. And you brought a lot of future. And we looked up to you. And one of the activities I want to say that it was Garo used to wake us up early in the morning and used to practice right with us. And you want us to be a hero. And that's why I want to say thank you for being there. A lot of our seminarian friends, they wanted to be here today. And I want to say the Kapikian family is well known in Jerusalem. If you guys don't know, I want you guys to know there, especially Yurek Sirpazan. In fact, I don't know if you know, Yurek Sirpazan's picture is in my office. I hang it there. And every time I walk there, I look at him and I just look at it because you said Jesus and your grandfather. Now it's Jesus and you. I want to finish off. Thank you.
Thank you.
You did a great job. Thank you for that. And thank you for presenting the Kapikian family, especially God. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Are there other questions we have from the audience? So I have a few questions, and I don't know if I should address them to. So sorry. Please go ahead.
Aside the question, what made the flora Armenian? Why do we call it?
Yeah, he also discusses this question. Why Armenian? Because it's mainly Sivas, right? If that's the question. So he incorporated other co-authors from all around the place. So he can name it not the flora of Sivas, but Armenian flora in general. Because he studied the parts mainly of what we call Western Armenia or the 6 provinces. He perceived that as Armenia and mainly described the plants of that area. That's why Armenian flora.
Questions? Perhaps okay, please go ahead.
Yeah, first, thank you so much for such a fascinating talk. I had a quick question about, of all the jaw-dropping moments you covered, about his work as a correspondent for the periodical in London, Henshaw.
Yeah.
I was just more curious, like, how did that work exactly? Did he work with existing like networks that had connections back in England, like maybe like missionary groups and stuff? Or
Yeah, not much is known, but what is known is that he was one of responsible to establishing it. There are like rare anecdotes of like using different professionals, like importers, exporters, these routes, and also interestingly, it's a question if Henchag was really published in London. That's another question because it might have been somewhere else in Europe, not London. That was another way to diverge. But it's a theory. Yeah, because it was secret, not much is known. Only a few anecdotes here and there, but nothing like nothing more. But people attribute to him establishing and using these networks.
One quick question, Robert. In the beginning, one of the slides, you pointed out a gentleman. I think you said that was my grandfather. He's wearing a top hat.
Yeah.
I never saw that picture. Can I see it again?
Yeah, sure.
I'm sorry. I never saw that.
Yeah, that one. Where did that?
That's it.
I have to check my sources.
So not a fez, he wore a top hat.
He also
Was
has pictures in Fez. Yeah, Fez is like common to
Yeah.
Armenians too. Yeah, it's not like
post-war?
no pre-genocide. This is Sivas. If I'm not mistaken, this is the celebration of. I have to check. I can check and let everybody know, whoever is interested.
Oh, that's so.
So I wonder, do you know what happened to Haji Hovanes, the brother of Garabed, who stayed?
Turks killed him. Poisoning.
So he wasn't able to survive as he had been promised.
He was painting the city hall. He was a fresco painter, painting the ceiling. There was another Armenian guy, I don't know his name. He's a relative of ours. And he it's related to the Madanian, and he's painting the ceiling, and he says, don't rush to finish this because they're going to kill us after it's done. And then when they finished, I guess that finished it all up, but they poisoned him. They invited him to dinner, Turks. Only a Turk could do this, and then they poisoned him, killed him. That's what I thought.
Other questions we have? Yes.
Question, it's just a general question. And I apologize if it's sort of an ignorant question, but before the term genocide didn't really come about until the 30s, like 40s. So what was the Armenian genocide called? What? Because I noticed the book was called the Armenian Genocide.
Yeah.
Medio.
Was there?
Yeah.
How was it referred to?
Yeah, so it had several names. The most common one before genocide, and up to this day, is Medzierern. Yern is an ancient word, if I'm not mistaken, coming from the golden age of Armenian literature, 5th century, if I'm not mistaken, which basically means a great crime, or a great tragedy, or a great catastrophe. That's like the general meaning, and Medzierern, Meds is great, so great catastrophe, something like this. That's it, and many other names, but this is the most common. But there is also now this issue. So this is what Armenians used to call it, but this term was also used to not call Armenian genocide a genocide. So it's kind of disqualifying term, they use a disqualifying term, but this is a term which Armenians use internally, like Holocaust for the Jewish genocide. Yeah. Or Shoah. This is the equivalent usage in Armenian.
Yes. Innocent question. How did the genocide stop? I mean, who was the
force that made the killing stop?
World War I came to an end, specifically in Ottoman Empire. There were attacks by Russia, Britain, France. Which, so yeah, eventual occupation of Near East and other areas, like Constantinople, so on.
He, as well as others, can tell you much more.
Oh,
We
I
have
understand.
also we have authorities on that subject. In fact, Dr. Taner Akcan here is the head of our Armenian Genocide Research Program, also who is interactive. Robert. Do we have other questions from our audience? Are there any questions from Zoom? No, okay. Well, I think we must thank you again, Robert. I'm very grateful to you. Let me just
Thank you very much.
We'll bring this to a close. Let me just mention our Promise Armenian Institute has a number of events coming up during the month of April. This is just a subset that I will tell you about. This coming Sunday, April 12th, at the Ararat Eskidjan Museum, there will be an exhibition and lecture on the visual culture of remembrance surrounding the Armenian Genocide. And this will be presented by another of our postdoctoral scholars, Dr. Gevorg Vardanyan, who is sitting here. This is coordinated by Dr. Taner Akcan, as I said, who is the head of our Promise Armenian Institute's Armenian Genocide Research Program, also coordinated by the Ararat Eskidjan Museum. This will be at 4 o'clock at the Ararat Eskidjan Museum on Sunday. Thursday, April 23rd, here at UCLA in Schoenberg Hall, there will be a special concert presented by the Armenian Music Program in observance of the Armenian Genocide, and also commemorating the 100th anniversary of the birth of the renowned composer Hachatur Avedisian. This is at 7 o'clock here on our campus. Saturday, April 25 at 11 a.m., there will be a Zoom-based webinar entitled A Biographical Approach to Genocidal Ruination, Knowledge, Nature, and Dispossession in Johannes Jacob Manisajian's life work. This will be presented by Dr. Nazan Maksudyan of Berlin, and this is sponsored by the Hovhannissian Chair in Modern Armenian History. This will be on Saturday, the 25th at 11 a.m. via Zoom. Finally, for those of you who are in Glendale, we are all over this Southern California region during April. On April 30th, Thursday, April 30th at 6 p.m. at the Glendale Central Library, there will be a presentation and readings by the Pulitzer Prize-winning poet Peter Balakian, reading especially excerpts from his latest book, New York Trilogy, with an emphasis on the Armenian Genocide. This is just April. We have other events in May that are coming up. So I would encourage you to take a look at our Promise Armenian Institute website, social media, add yourself to our listserv if you haven't already, and we would love to welcome you to more events. Let me, before we close, thank our wonderful Deputy Director, Hasmik Bagdasarian, as well as Nanar Hartunian, Emily Polosian, Aram Manukian, who always is faithfully helping us as well. Thank you so much for coordinating everything behind the scenes. And thanks to all of you for being here. We would love to welcome you to our next event. Thank you so much. Please take a look at the various exhibits that Robert has worked so hard to put together, as well as enjoying our refreshments. Yes.
Yes, yes.
Oh, we should take a few other pictures.
Yeah, let's take a picture together.
Yeah. We should get Oscar in a picture.
Yeah,
too.
let's. Ask it, ask it.
Outstanding. He was taking notes seriously. It's, yeah, fantastic. Yeah, let's take a picture with Robert. Oh, okay.
Well, let's go.
Thank you. And continue on later with the company.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.